Okay, so let's start the show. Welcome to another Azure Serbia meetup. Today with us we have Thomas Maurer. Thomas is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft, and he will talk about managing hybrid servers with Azure Arc. Thomas, the stage is yours. Please just unmute yourself.
I'm not so good with technology. Oh, that's awesome. Sorry, thank you about that. So thank you, Alexander, for having me. First of all, let me say it's a pleasure to speak. This is, I think, my first session in Serbia. Unfortunately, only virtual. I would love to definitely come to Serbia one day and do a user group there. I heard you have very good food, so that's definitely a good reason, one of a good reason to come there. So yeah, so my name is Thomas Maurer. As Alexander said, I work as a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. And before I start with the session, I want to quickly let's just explain what a senior cloud advocate or what a cloud advocate does at Microsoft. Because I get this question a lot. So we are part of the Azure engineering team, and we have like two high-level goals, if you will. One of them is creating and delivering content, such as user group and events and conferences like Microsoft Ignite and Build, but then also working on, for example, Microsoft Docs and especially Microsoft Learn, which I can highly recommend if you want to learn a little bit more about Azure, but also other Microsoft technology. Microsoft Learn is basically a free learning platform, which you can, without even having an Azure subscription or a credit card, you can go out and try out Azure, not just read about it or watch videos. And the other big part we are doing is collecting feedback from our customers about what is working, what is not working, where can our engineering teams improve for different services. So I'm also happy to listen to you. So if you want to have, if you have feedback, but also questions, feel free to use the chat to basically get these questions in. I will definitely have time at the end of this presentation to look through them and like try to answer these questions if you have any. Yeah, so let's talk about this topic with Azure Arc, and I'm going to talk mostly about managing hybrid servers, meaning servers running on premises or even in a multi-cloud environment. And I will explain that a lot because hybrid doesn't mean just on-prem or in Azure anymore. It also means at the intelligent edge or at other cloud provider, basically everywhere. And that that is the main key. And I promise you, I will have a lot of demos in this presentation. However, I want to start to give some background why we actually developed that service and what we are trying to address with Azure Arc. So let me quickly go to the next slide here. And so again, to set the stage a little bit, I want to share a little bit what we are seeing from our customers and our customers' environment and see a little bit, okay, what are the main challenges our customers see? And one point is really that their environments are getting increasingly complex. And we can define three main scenarios where this is happening, right? They're not the only ones, but the three main reasons why they're getting increasingly complex. So today, if you're a customer, an IT department, or even developers and IT pros and IT operations, the chances are high that you manage a lot of apps, right? These can be even hundreds or even thousands of applications. And some of them are probably very modern applications, very written in modern languages. They could run on PaaS services, serverless, containerized, and so on. However, chances are high that you're also dealing with traditional applications, which are running in virtual machines or even on physical boxes, right? And all of these you need, in some way, you need to manage these and manage all these different applications you have. Another thing we are seeing is that our customers have a very diverse infrastructure. Often they have their own data centers, they run services at local hosters, they have branch offices, stores, factories, where they run servers or applications, or even IoT devices, right? So there's a lot of infrastructure, if you will, to manage as well. And then last thing is, like what I already mentioned, is multi-cloud. So we are seeing that some customers are deciding to go a multi-cloud approach, and that can make sense absolutely in certain cases, right? We have seen, for example, customers where historically they probably were using another cloud provider, and then they decided to go with Microsoft Azure, which is, by the way, a fantastic decision. Yeah, so they're not really like this department which already used another cloud provider. They're probably not just going to migrate everything just like because they're migrating. They don't have time, they don't have the budget to do all of that, and they end up in a multi-cloud environment. But obviously, this is not the only reasons. There also can be some strategic reasons, like some services work better for you in another cloud provider, or, for example, some companies decide as a strategy to run services in different cloud providers, right? But again, this also adds complexity when it comes to managing infrastructure and applications and just doing IT operations and running basically all these applications where our customer needs, right? So I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide here. This is Jason Sanders at the keynote at Microsoft Ignite 2019, directly after Satya's keynote. And Jason Sanders is the engineering lead basically for all the Azure services. So all the Azure engineering teams who are developing the different Azure services, at the end, they basically report to him. And he spends a lot of time in his Ignite keynote talking about hybrid. And one sentence he says is that we think that hybrid is an end state for our customers and not just the in-between state until they moved everything to the cloud, right? And I feel like that is a very important statement because, again, we are very serious about doing hybrid and seeing the need of customers to run services in a hybrid environment. And again, there are many, many reasons why you want this. This can be, for example, technology, what I call the technology reasons. It can be like that you don't have a reliable network connectivity, or you just don't want to have the dependency on networking. You want to run services where there is no internet connectivity, or you just have applications which can't deal with the latency to the next Azure data center, for example. So that are like, there are even more technology reasons for that, right? I often talk to customers, and I have one large customer who has factories all over the place, and he doesn't want the whole factory to rely on internet connectivity to the cloud, right? He wants to make sure that even if there is no internet connectivity for some sort of reason, that the factory can still keep running. However, when it then comes to large processing of data, he then will still take advantage of the cloud. So again, there are many, many reasons. There are also like data sovereignty reasons, regulations, which basically in some cases maybe do not allow you to store data outside of your country or even outside of your company. And so, again, we see that a lot from our customers, and that is why we set our hybrid portfolio up like this. Now, what I also want to mention is that hybrid really is the core of the Azure DNA, right? We did a very bad job in the past talking about this, but really, like a lot of the Azure services already for a couple of years support hybrid scenarios, right? So if you look at, for example, if you look at this picture here with that slide, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that slide later on, but you can see here on the bottom, we have like management services, we have security services, data services, and even DevOps environments where we already take advantage of hybrid management, right? If you look at, for example, Azure Update Management, Azure Automation, when it comes to security with Azure Security Center or Azure Sentinel, when it comes to data where you can like connect your on-prem SQL Server to Azure, or then when we look at, for example, in the DevOps space, where we have our Azure DevOps service, but then also our Azure DevOps server, and we can both connect them together. Now, you can also see 4 or 3 big pillars here, which are usually identified as well as a hybrid, right? So we have obviously Azure IoT, which is a big part of that, especially when you connect your IoT devices to the cloud. However, I don't have much time to talk about Azure IoT today. That's also not the plan. But again, this is also a big part of the hybrid innovation we are doing in Azure. And then the last thing, or the thing on the right, with our Azure Stack portfolio. Again, Azure Stack is not just a single product anymore. If you followed the news, it's now a family or portfolio of products and solutions with Azure Stack Hub, which is formerly known as Azure Stack, like the original Azure Stack. But then we also have now Azure Stack Edge, which was before called Databox Edge, which allows you to run for example, AI at the edge, which is a first-party appliance you can order from the Azure portal, and then you can basically go out and run these services, and then when you analyzed it, send it off to the cloud, if you will. And then we have the third one, which is a very interesting one, is Azure Stack HCI, which is our hyper-converged solution, which is basically validated hardware together with Windows Server 2019. Together in a package, which allows you, when it comes to like doing virtualization, where you have cloud-inspired hyper-converged infrastructure, which you can start very small from a 2-node cluster up to very large environments with like multiple 16-node clusters, very high performance, a lot of storage if you need to. But we are here to talk today about the middle part, which is Azure Arc, right? And Azure Arc is not just here to manage servers, and I will talk a little bit about that in a bit, but it will really allow you to do a couple of different scenarios, and I will take in our demos servers as an example. So to go a little bit deeper in that, what I just said, and to give you an introduction into Azure Arc, I want to show you that slide. And we start on the bottom right again. I'm not going to talk too much about IoT. IoT is one of our hybrid services where we can extend service to the edge. Then we have our Azure Stack portfolio, which really helps you to put infrastructure inside, for example, your data centers or your locations. And then with Azure Arc, the last piece on the left side is basically bringing Azure services to any infrastructure. And with that, we mean really in your data center, running virtualized, running on physical machines, or even at other cloud providers, right? That is one part of Azure Arc. However, another large part of Azure Arc is, as you can see, the single line here as the single control plane for Azure services, but extending that to run for services running outside of Azure. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. So what does it actually mean to use Azure as a control plane, right? We had many customers telling us, hey, we are using Azure to manage all our Azure resources. And so they were part very early on where we had Windows Azure or service management automation, and quickly realized that it's very difficult to manage all these cloud resources. So that is when we then introduced Azure Resource Manager, which allows you to easily organize your Azure resources. You can use tags, you can use different governance and management tools to manage all of that. Now, our customers said, hey, this is great to manage Azure services. Why can we not use this to manage services which are running outside of Azure? And that is exactly where Azure Arc can come in and bridge these two worlds, right? And say, hey, you can use Azure as a control plane, not just for Azure services, but then also for services running outside of Azure. And then I can use that control plane to basically go out and organize and govern my resources at scale, can manage them directly from the Azure portal, or also using obviously tools like PowerShell or the Azure Resource Graph and so on. And then this also allows us, Azure Arc, with that, for example, when it comes to the Azure Kubernetes part, for example, to also bring these cloud developer practices, which you use against Azure, to bring these also to your on-prem environment. And then obviously the last one, where we also bring Azure security capabilities to any infrastructure. So that is basically when we talk about this single control plane, that is what we are talking about today. And better than talking about this for hours, I think I'm just going to show you this in a quick demo. So let me switch here to my Azure environment. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat and we will cover these at the end. So here I'm in the Azure portal, and I really hope everyone has seen that before. I'm on the all resources page, so I can basically see all my Azure resources. And you can see here a very quick overview. You can see here, I can see all my objects, right? I can see virtual machines, I can see routing tables, public IP addresses, network security groups, disks, databases, app services, everything which is basically an object in Azure, I can find here. And again, Azure Resource Manager does a great job helping me to organize and manage these resources. So what I can do, for example, here, I can obviously add them to a resource group. All of them are basically part of a location or an Azure region, and they're part of an Azure subscription. And I can also use tagging to tag different resources, right? So I can, for example, create a cost center tag, or as you can see here, a location tag to make sure, hey, when someone wants to list all the cost center items, he can easily do that, or he can use that on different parts in Azure. For example, when it comes to cost management and he wants to analyze the spending, he can use these tags as well. So there are different tools and management capabilities you can use in Azure. Now, again, wouldn't it be great to extend this for resources outside of Azure? And exactly that is where Azure Arc comes in. So to make that a little bit more visible, I'm going to change the type here. And instead of having all resources, I'm just going to show you the Azure virtual machines, as well as my Azure Arc machines. So these are servers which I already onboarded earlier, which now show up as Azure resources. And no worries, I'm going to show you how you onboard Azure Arc machines a little bit later on. So I want to list these. And now what you can see here, I can see my Azure VMs and my Azure Arc machines side by side. So my Azure Arc machines, that can mean they can run locally in my data center, or they could run even at the other cloud provider. And you can see here, I use tags here, for example, to address this. So you can see here, I have a location tag, which basically says where they're running. So for example, here I have one which is running in the Zurich data center. I have one in the Seattle data center. I have one in New York data center. To be honest with you, they're basically all running on my lab server here underneath my desk, but you get the example, right? So I can also use, for example, grouping to make that a little bit more visible. And now you can see here all my external servers, and on the bottom, my Azure Arc machines. Now, as I mentioned, you can now go out and take advantage of tags. So let's say, for example, a customer is telling me, hey, I want to list all my resources from a specific cost center. So I already created a cost center tag, so I'm going to use that one. And then I'm just going to select, I want to see all my servers from cost center 1001. So if I do create that filter, you can now see, I can not only see my Azure VM, which belongs to that cost center, I can also see my on-prem machine, my Ubuntu machine here, which runs locally in my data center as well, right? So I get that overview about all my different servers and services. And again, I'm talking here about servers, but it can also extend to other things like Kubernetes clusters, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. Now, I showed you the portal is a great tool to manage that, but it's not just limited to the portal. So if I go, for example, I want to show you that really quickly, is I can, for example, use Azure Resource Graph. I'm going to use that in the portal as well, but you can obviously run queries against this as well. So what I want to do here, I could obviously go out and say, hey, show me all my Azure Arc machines here. And I zoom in here. This is a query using the keyword query language, or some of you maybe remember the name Custo, to just list all of resources where a specific type. And here's also something important. This is the Azure Arc enabled servers type. So this is called like the Microsoft hybrid compute machines. So when I run this query, it basically lists me all my machines. That's basically the same machines you saw before, which are just running in Azure, in my on-prem environment or outside of Azure, if you will. I can also combine this and then, for example, say, hey, list my Azure Arc machines as well as my Azure machines. So if I go quickly in here, you can see here, show me my Azure VMs as well as my hybrid compute VMs. And if I run that query, it will list me the same thing. But I can also then, if I need to go to my manager, I could just go and simply create, for example, a nice chart. Oops. Oh, sorry, I forgot. So I need to count that, obviously. So I want to group them. Sorry about that. That was just the list one. Here, this one groups it. I also do a count by type. So I want to get an overview. How many VMs do I run in Azure versus how many VMs do I run outside of Azure? I can simply do that. And then you get that table list here. And again, I can also create a nice chart. If I go to my manager, that very often helps to explain things when you have graphs with nice colors and so on. No, but again, you get the point. It's not just a view inside the portal. It really becomes a Azure Resource Manager object, which you can leverage with all the different tools. Now, you may say now, okay, Thomas, it's great that I can see my servers which are not outside of Azure, but come on, there must be more. And yes, absolutely. So one thing we can do is we can use Azure Policy. Now, Azure Policy, for those who don't know, they allow us to manage and basically govern and configure our Azure environment. Think about you have your environment and you want to give access to different developers or different parts of your organization to kind of like use it as a self-service or deploy machines or applications to it. Now, we have this great thing called MV2 series virtual machines. They have, I think, they can have up to like over 200 virtual cores, up to 12 terabytes of memory, and they drain your credit card in like 3 seconds. So you don't want every developer to deploy these machines, right? But you also don't want to like get an manual approval process for all the stuff which needs to get deployed to Azure, because then you lose like the speed and agility of what the cloud delivers. So that is where policy can come in and say, hey, you're only allowed to deploy certain VM sizes or certain applications, or also you can only use, for example, certain Azure regions. So you can limit the regions where someone can deploy and so on. Now, what a lot of people don't know is there's also something called Azure Guest Configuration Policy. And this allows you basically to audit and configure the operating system settings of a virtual machine running in Azure, right? Doesn't matter if it's Linux or Windows, but you can basically go out and say, hey, I want to have certain settings on that machine. And for that, you can use Azure Guest Configuration Policy. And I'm going to show you an example for this. So I go to assignments and I'm going to create a new or assign a new initiative. Now, an initiative is just a group of policies, if you will, which help you with that scenario. And the one thing you do, basically, you select the scope, which can be a management group, a subscription, a resource group, even down to certain resources. And the next thing you would do, basically, you would go out and select the definition you want to assign. Now, as you can see here, we already have a couple of built-in policy definitions, and they have different settings. So if I scroll down, you can, for example, do some like enable monitoring in Azure Security Center. You can even go down. So if you deal with UK official or UK NHS certification, you can do that as well. There's also for standards for ISO or PCI. to basically go out and audit and see, hey, is my environment configured in the right way? Now, what I want to do is I want to find out if my VMs or my servers have insecure password settings, right? So I would just select this and then basically assign this. Now, this will then take a little bit of time. So I already prepared this. So I go back here to policies. And after I have assigned this, what I want to obviously check is my Azure environment compliant with this? So I go to compliance. And you can see here all the assignments I created. So you can see here I have a lot of assignments which I'm not compliant, but luckily I also have some where I'm compliant and everything is set up in the right way. Now, what is important here, I want to obviously take care of the non-compliant one. And you can see here I have an assignment which says, hey, audit VMs with insecure password settings. And you can see I'm not compliant. So I want to find out what the problem is here. And this is just an example, again, which I want to go through. There are multiple policies which work in a similar way. So this one goes out, and if I scroll down, you can see here also the different policies which I'm not compliant and which I'm compliant with. So that is one thing I can see. But then I obviously also want to see the resources which are not compliant. So if I go to click on this, you can now see that it shows me not just the Azure VMs which are not compliant, but thanks to Azure Arc, also my on-prem machines. So you can see here, again, if you look at the resource type, I have a couple of Azure machines here, like my Microsoft Compute virtual machines. Or I also have my Microsoft.hybrid compute machines, which are my external machines. And it shows me that these are not compliant as well. So this is a very great tool to check if my machines are compliant with my company policies I set up. And again, you can also create your own, again, if you're familiar with that. So this is just one part. I'm going to show you much more what you can do with Azure Arc machines. But let me quickly go back to the slides because how is that actually possible? So for that, I have here a high-level overview about our Azure management and about our control plane for Azure resources. Now, no worries, we will start on the left side here. And you can see here, me as an Azure customer, if I interact with Azure, I can basically go out and manage Azure resources through the portal, PowerShell, the Azure CLI, if you will, certain APIs, directly from the marketplace and so on. But what you're actually doing is you're interacting with Azure Resource Manager in the background. And Azure Resource Manager is really the magic when it comes to role-based access controls, subscription management, logs, policies, blueprints, tagging, resource groups, and all that kind of stuff. And you can also see on the top, we have a couple of management services like Azure Update Management, monitoring, and so on. And today, all of this, or Azure Resource Manager, was just capable to manage Azure services, right? So you were able to manage all these services. I think we have now far over 200 services which you could manage. And again, this can be VMs, but also containers, Kubernetes clusters, and so on. Now, people, as I said, why not use that also for resources outside of Azure? And that is exactly where Azure Arc comes in. So here we can see Azure Arc really is the bridge to bring non-Azure resources into Azure Resource Manager. And you can see here today, we are listing 3 different types of resources. This can be servers, again, can be Windows and Linux, running on-prem or at other cloud providers, but it can also be Kubernetes clusters, right? So if you have your Kubernetes clusters where you deploy stuff, you can also have these as well. And then the last one, there's a little bit more complex to that, is data services. So there are 2 things, and I'm going to talk a little bit about data services in a bit. But this then gives you the capabilities you have from Azure Resource Manager for your resources outside of Azure. And also what is very important is this is not just going to replace your this is not just going out and replacing your local tools, right? You can still use these. You can still use your existing server management tools, like your Azure Data Studio, for example, for Azure SQL. You can use your Kubernetes tools and so on, but you get that rich management capabilities from Azure Resource Manager. And that is what I'll show you a little bit more and switch to the next demo here. So I'm going back to the Azure portal. And if I want to work with Azure Arc, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to Azure, search for Azure Arc, and it will show up here in the portal. And now you can see here the 3 scenarios which I just talked about. I can organize and govern servers, so I can go out and manage these, but I can also connect Kubernetes clusters and manage them with policies, or also do app configuration, for example, using a method called GitOps to actually go out and deploy apps and applications to these Kubernetes clusters. And then the last one really is about data services. And the last one is still in private preview, while the other ones are in public preview, which you can go out today and try them out. Now, the Azure Data Services part basically said, hey, our customers went out and said, look, we like Azure SQL. It's really great that we can actually go out and scale them. We like that to have them as a service where we don't need to manage them. But some data can't go into Azure data centers. Again, could be connectivity parts, could be latency, could be regulations. So we need Azure SQL, for example, in our data center. And that is exactly what Azure Arc Data Services does. It allows you to run Azure SQL and Azure Postgres at the customer's location. So you can run it in your own data center or even at another cloud provider. How cool is that? We also announced something new, I think, last week or even 2 weeks ago, where we allow you to connect existing SQL servers to Azure and then use Azure Security Center to basically do security assessments. But again, we are here to learn about server management. So if I click on server management, you can now see here all my servers which I already onboarded to Azure. And you can see here, they are, as I said, they're joined to a resource group and to a subscription and even to a region. Now, if I click on one of my servers here, so I'm going to select this server here, you can see it looks like an Azure resource, right? It has a resource. It's part of a resource group. It is joined to an Azure region. It's part of a subscription. It uses tags. And then on the left side here, I get some additional information like the real computer name of that server. I can also see it's a Windows server or Linux server, and so on. Now, when I look at the menu here, again, it looks like Azure. So I get the activity log, I get role-based access management. And that is actually a pretty interesting part. Now, think about you're in a company and you're managing a lot of servers, not just in Azure, but also outside. And you have certain application admins, and they should see only their servers, right? So if you have a SharePoint admin, he should only see his SharePoint servers. And that is what you can do actually using role-based access control. So you can make sure that you have a group, for example, for SharePoint admins, which are then only seeing the servers where SharePoint runs on instead of everything. I can, as I showed you, I can use tags. And then now we are getting into the interesting part. So we have a couple of different things here which we can use. And I want to start with extensions. So this is new. I think we released that like 3 or 4 weeks ago as an additional feature. And this allows you to basically take advantage of the VM extensions we are having in Azure, right? If you have an Azure virtual machine, you're probably familiar with that. So I can go out and you can see here I already deployed a couple of extensions on that server. But if I want to do that, I can just click on add, and you can see here I have different options here. So what I can do here, I can use the custom script extension to run a script against my server. If it's a Windows server, this will be a PowerShell script, or if it's a Linux server, you can just run a shell script against that server, right? So even if that server is completely like from a location wise, you cannot reach it, but you have access to the Azure portal, you can go out and run a script. You can also use PowerShell desired state configuration to manage that server, or you can go out and deploy the Microsoft monitoring agent or the log analytics agent to that machine, and then you can create. And what you just need to do is then basically add the workspace ID from your Azure Log Analytics workspace and the key for that. Now, this will then deploy that specific agent to that machine, and this will enable new scenarios like log analytics, update management, and so on. So this is about the extensions. Now, as I said, there's much more. Now, when I deployed then also the monitoring agent, like the Azure monitoring agent or the log analytics agent that I just showed you, I can now take advantage of logs. So if I click on logs here, you can now see I can run queries against that machine, like from log analytics. Now you might say, hey, Thomas, I could do that before, right? If I just installed the monitoring agent, like I could run that before. Yes, but the problem really was that when you're a large company or multiple admins, what you needed to do was you need to give people access to the Azure Log Analytics workspace. And in that case, they could basically see the logs of all your systems. Now, you can see that the scope is limited to only that specific server. So now I can go out and again use the keyword query language, and I already have a query here, so I'm going to run that from the query history. This query will just go in and basically show me all the update logs. Now, if I have then a look at the result, you can see here, I can see here all the updates. You can also, which are installed, but also the ones which are needed. So you get an access to the update log. And again, there's much more. It's not just about updates, but you can see here I have a lot of different things I can actually have a look at. If I enable it, I can, for example, have the system log, the security log, and so on to manage my server. Now, before we go further, I want to quickly show you also something. Like I showed you policy before, right? So I showed you to get an overview about all my system, about my whole environment. But if I'm now the server admin for that specific server, I just want to see the policies which are assigned to that server. And I just want to see, like, to find out, hey, am I compliant or not? So you can see here that for this server, these are all the policies or initiatives which are assigned. And you can see here, most of them I am compliant, but then I have a couple of them which I'm not compliant. And so, for example, you already saw the ones with the insecure password settings. I can also have, for example, one which goes out and checks my VMs if they are set to a specific time zone. And then I could go out and basically say, hey, I want all my machines to be that specific time zone, otherwise they're not compliant. And now I could go and manually change that. Or I could go and, like, for example, create a remediation task to set the specific time zone. Now, keep in mind, we are currently in public preview, so some of the features with the time zones, for example, or settings could be that they are limited in that case. But again, that's the idea of how it would work. I also want to take advantage now of change tracking. So these are all new features which we again added a couple of months ago, a couple of weeks ago. So for example, we can now see like with the Azure monitoring agent or the Microsoft monitoring agent, we can now see changes happening to that machine. So I can see here everything which happened with that machine, if there are any changes to it, if there are any services changed, and so on. I can also go and do some inventory here and see, hey, what is all the software which is installed? And you can see here I have a couple of updates installed. I have obviously the Azure Arc agent, or also called Azure Connected Machine agent, installed on that machine. I will talk a little bit about that later on, but that is basically what enables us to see that server within Azure. And then you can see here I have normal software installed. For example, that server also has Microsoft Edge installed, again, which maybe is not a great idea, but I can actually see everything which is installed on that machine. And now I already showed you the update log, right? So I know that there are probably updates which I need to install, but for that we also have update management. You can now see that here I have 2 updates missing. Interestingly, one of them I don't care too much. It's the definition update for the Microsoft Defender, which will be installed anyway in a bit. But then you can see I also have critical updates. And this one, funny or not, is a update for the Azure Connected Machine Agent. So what I can now do is I can see this also obviously would show any update rollup which is missing. And so what I can do here is I could now go out and say, hey, I want to patch my server. So I click on Schedule Update, give that a name. This is my WAC server. So I'll say like that's WAC July. It obviously automatically detects that this is a Windows system. I can then configure the maintenance window. I can also configure my reboot options. So for example, let's say after the update is installed, it should reboot if required. So that's actually a good idea. So I would leave that. And now I want to go schedule it. So what you can do here is I can say, hey, update now. So update now will trigger the update in like 5 to 10 minutes from now when I start this. Or I can say, yeah, that's maybe not a good idea, especially because I'm doing a presentation right now. I want to schedule it for later. Or even like if you think about it, if you're like you're working in a company, you want to probably schedule it outside of work hours. So you can go out and schedule it. You can also create a recurring task and say, hey, I want to have weekly updates installed or like just like monthly or whatever you like, and so on. So for now, I'm just going to go back. I can also select the classification. So I can say what updates I want to have installed. I can also include and exclude updates as well. I can go out and run pre and post scripts during that update run. And then at the end, I just review it and I can basically go out and create that update deployment. And then it would go out and patch that update, right? So again, this time in this scenario, I would only patch my single server. So if I'm now the SharePoint admin, which manages that specific server, I can now self-service go and patch my system without creating an RTP connection to that system or patching all my systems. I just can do that for my machine. Now you could say, yeah, that's great, but usually we have an admin who does the update management for all that, and absolutely it uses in the background, it uses the Azure Update Management, right? So it's not something completely new, it uses Azure Update Management. So if I click here and to manage multiple machines, I can go to my automation account, again, only if I have access to it, obviously. And then under Update Management, I can now see all my machines running in Azure or not in outside of Azure. And I could here create a scheduled update deployment with a group of servers, say, hey, patch all my machines on Tuesday at 8 p.m., for example. The same thing, by the way, with inventory and change tracking, right? So I can see here machines, I get information about that, and the same thing for change tracking. Now, the point here I want to make, again, these things, like Azure Automation with update management and inventory and change tracking are existing for a while, right? These are not new services. We have them for years. And again, we did not do a great job to mentioning to a lot of people that they exist. But with Azure Arc now, we can go out and use RBAC basically to give one person control just about one single server. And we will see much more integration of these hybrid services. Now, the last thing I want to show you here for that specific machine is also monitoring or insights. So I can go and activate Azure Monitor for my machine, and I get some additional information also for my on-prem machine. And you can see here, if I scroll in a little bit, you can see here the ports which my server is using, and then the endpoints or servers he is connecting to. So I see that my server is connecting to 10 other endpoints using port 443. So let me quickly see what endpoints that server is connecting to. And you can now see here, zoom in, these are the endpoints I'm connecting to. You can also see, obviously, if I go down here, also other ports. Let me see if I find the right one. Oops. So for example, this port here, port 135, it obviously connects to an internal server, but I get this dependency map and I can see, hey, what is my server actually doing? And I can just simply enable that with Azure Monitor. I also get, for example, performance information. So I can have a look at, hey, how much disk space do I have left on that server? How is the CPU utilization? How is memory utilization, different disk IOPS, disk throughput, and so on, right? So I get all that information for that system directly within the Azure portal. And again, this is not leveraging something, is not something new. This is like leveraging Azure Monitor, which you again can work together with your Azure VMs, but also your on-prem VMs, or even VMs or servers. You can even be physical servers in your location, or even servers running in another cloud provider, right? So I let you wait long enough. So the last thing I really want to show you is how do I actually now add a server to this environment? And it's actually very simple. We're going to add an agent to your server. That is the Azure Connected Machine agent, which I showed you before. And to do that, we need to do a couple of things. We can basically just go to the documentation and read where we should download that agent and which command to run. But the team made it very simple for you to add a server. So you can click on add, and you will see here right now we have two options. The first one really is to run a interactive script, which means that I copy a script which will download the agent, install the agent, and then register my server. And while registering my server, I will need to enter my credentials for Azure. Now, again, if I want to do that with one single server, that's fine. But if I want to onboard server at scale, I probably don't want to log in on all of my machines. So I can use a service principal to basically onboard machines at scale. And that service principal only has permissions to onboard Azure Arc machines, right? So I can take that and I can automate that script without any pain. But for now, to make it a little bit like so you can actually see something, we generate the interactive script one. Now, for that wizard will help you to create the script. And what I'm going to do, as every Azure resource, I need to basically have it in a subscription, and I need to join it to a resource group, and then I will need to select a Azure region. Now, the Azure region should be the closest region from your server, right? It does not send, it doesn't move that server in this region, or does not send any information except for metadata information to that region. Today, we're offering 4 different regions. Again, this is just because we are in public preview, right? So you can expect more regions to pop up here in the preview, but also especially after the preview. I would then select, hey, is this a Windows machine or Linux machine I want to join? In my case, it's a Windows machine. And then I could, if the server is behind a proxy, I also can configure that. I can also then add already some tags if I wanted to, or I can obviously add them later at any point in time. And then on the last screen, I could go out and download the script and run that, or I can just have a look here. And you can basically see here, it does the 3 steps I actually telling you is like it's downloading the package or downloading the agent, which in the Windows world is a MSI file. It will install the MSI file, and then the last one really is connecting that server or that agent to Azure and to the specific resource group, to the specific tenant, and so on. And that is basically how I onboard a server to Azure Arc. Now for that, let me switch back to the slides. I hope that gave you a great overview about how that works. And I want to quickly give you some of the key takeaways I was just showing you. So first of all, what Azure Arc for servers or Azure Arc enabled servers do is you get that rich inventory, right? You can see your Windows and Linux servers. You can add physical or virtual machines running in your private data center or even at other cloud providers, and it's completely domain agnostic. You then can use governance and security and management tools to manage these servers. So I showed you how you can, for example, use Azure Policy or Azure Guest Configuration Policy to manage your servers in Azure, but also, again, your Azure Arc enabled servers. And you can actually see if they are compliant or not. The next thing, which is very important to this, is role-based access, right? Again, a lot of these services I showed you, for example, update management and others, they were available before, but again, it was not really limited to, like you could not really limit it, just give access to an admin for one specific server or 2 or 3 specific server. It was basically all or nothing. Now with Azure Arc, you can really do that role-based access control and basically give access to the servers they should. Now, another great thing, if you're working for a managed service provider, for example, where you manage multiple Azure environments, you can also take advantage of Azure Lighthouse, right? So you can go out and manage, for example, systems for multiple organizations as well. And then the last one, really, I showed you that very early in the beginning. You get all that inventory data, right? You get the overview about all these systems, wherever they are running. You can use tags, you can use subscriptions, you can use resource groups to manage, to organize this. But again, this is, as I said, this is just one of the use cases of Azure Arc. Is really when it comes to govern and management your systems using, for example, Azure Policy. You can do that with servers, but also with your Kubernetes clusters, right? So you can basically go out and make sure that your Kubernetes clusters running in your data center have policies assigned so you can see that they're securely configured. When it comes to Kubernetes management, you can, again, I mentioned that before, you can also extend this and not just do like security management, you can also do app management at scale using things like GitOps to basically go out and deploy these applications on your Kubernetes cluster. And then the last one is, as I mentioned, Azure Data Services, where you get the capabilities to run Azure SQL and Azure Postgres in your data center or your customer location, wherever you need them. And so this is the high level overview. Architecture overview I want to show you. Again, we're going to start on the left side here. As I mentioned before, if you're using the portal, the CLI, or the Azure SDK, or even APIs and so on, you're going to go and manage or interact with Azure Resource Manager. And what we have here is we have different resource providers. And in blue, you can see the Arc specific resource providers. So when we start on the bottom, we have an Azure Arc server resource provider, which does all the connections with the servers. You can see here we have the Azure Arc server agent or the Azure Connected Machine agent, which connects to that and makes the server visible and manageable in the Azure portal or through Azure Resource Manager. We have the same thing for Kubernetes clusters. We have a Kubernetes clusters RP. And again, you would deploy an agent on your Kubernetes cluster running outside of Azure, and that would then connect to that environment. And then you can also do things like connect to the container registry and so on. And then the last one for data services, this is actually interesting because data service, if you want to run Azure SQL in your data center or at another cloud provider or at the edge, the only thing you will need is a Kubernetes cluster, and then you will actually deploy Azure Arc data services on top of that. And again, you can bring all of these together. Also, as I mentioned before, very important, you still can use your specific tools you used before, right? So if you have different server admin tools, you can still use these. If you're running Kubernetes, you can still use the tools you were using before in addition to Azure Arc. And this is like, I want to close it a little bit soon with this one. I just want to bring this up because you saw that slide before with Jason Sanders. We have a ton of different management tools. We have our IoT suite. We have our Azure Stack portfolio with Azure Stack HCI, Azure Stack Edge, and Azure Stack Hub. And then we have now Azure Arc, which allows you to basically run and manage Azure services on any infrastructure, right? And so why I put this slide here is really to explain one thing, because I get this question a lot, is from people saying, hey, so do we still need Azure Stack? Because now we have Azure Arc. And yes, absolutely. So Azure Arc and Azure Stack, those are different products and solutions for different requirements, right? So Azure Stack, or the Azure Stack portfolio, really brings infrastructure into your data center and can do different scenarios, for example, also in disconnected environments. Bring different services to life and get your own instance, for example, of Azure Resource Manager. While Azure Arc really helps you to onboard services which are outside of Azure to the control plane from Azure, and you can manage that from there. Now, again, addressing different scenarios, but they also work very well together. So think about if you have an Azure Stack Hub, which gives you your own Azure Resource Manager. So you can actually go out and, for example, also deploy the Azure Kubernetes engine right now on top of Azure Stack Hub to run containers and containerized applications. But then you can connect it using Azure Arc to Azure, bring down the security policies to your Kubernetes cluster, and also configure the app deployment using Azure Arc on the Kubernetes cluster, which runs again on Azure Stack Hub. So those services and solutions, they also run very well together. It really depends on the customer scenario you have or your needs you have for these different settings. So with that, I want to go over to questions and ask if there are any in the chat. Feel free. From my side, you can also unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
Hi, Thomas. This is Jorge from Mexico. I have one question. We have some stacks deployed, but the problem we already have is that we have several portals, one for each stack. So with Arc, we will be able to see all the Arc services in a single pane of glass, but only for policies, right? We cannot deploy or manage the infra from there. Just apply policies and do it, right?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, hi and welcome joining that call. Yes, so thank you very much for your question. If I understand correctly, you have multiple Azure stacks, and obviously you have multiple portals for each of these Azure stacks, and what you want to have is like a single view, right? So exactly. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that is like, you can use Azure Arc, for example, for the Kubernetes cluster part, but it's not intended to do like the infrastructure management of multiple Azure Stack environments, as you already pointed out. And then this Azure Arc will not change this. It's even funny because so virtual machines on Azure Stack Hub are actually treated as Azure VMs, right? And so Azure Arc at the end allows you to add servers which are outside of Azure, and so that's going to be a whole other challenge. But however, that said, there should be a private preview for multi Azure Stack management. The thing is, please drop me an email. I will check if I can connect you with the right people. But we definitely have your feedback. You just like the scenario you mentioned. We have heard that before. So definitely write me an email. I know that this was, I think, announced during build that we have, I think, a private preview. So I will put my email address here in the chat, just a second. And then I will try to connect you. Please write like your information and like what servers, what clusters do you have and stuff like that. And then I will try to connect to the right person within the Azure Stack team.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank
you.
We
have been dealing with that, with having multiple portals and multiple inventories. It's been a challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, but is it just to just clarify? Is it the managing the stack itself or the applications on top?
No, the stack itself. I mean, we only manage the infra behind, so it's been a challenge to manage all these, because we have the portal itself. I mean, the cloud, and also the stacks, and also we try to add to the Arc the servers from VMware, And it's been kind of tricky to manage all those inventories at the same time.
Yeah, no, got you. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So if it comes down to multiple stack like infra management, there should be a announcement again that we have a private preview for this. And again, I'm happy to connect you with the right people within the Azure Stack product group.
Perfect, thank you.
Thomas, can you talk about pricing? How much does it cost to onboard on-premises machine to Azure Arc?
Yeah, thank you, Alexander. That's a very good question, which I can already tell you I can't finally answer this because we haven't really talked about costs of Azure Arc itself. However, what I can tell you currently in preview, Azure Arc for servers is free in a way you can onboard these and use, for example, Policy. However, as soon as you're going to use the Log Analytics workspace together with the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, you will obviously pay for the Log Analytics data. I can't really say about the roadmap or what will be announced as soon as we go out of preview. We haven't really disclosed anything, and to be really honest, I really don't know what it will be. I can tell you that we have I personally have certain feelings because some parts, like the Azure Server part, there is not much we need like to enable because the servers are obviously running somewhere else. But if you look, for example, for the data services part, there it's a little bit a different story because you get obviously something which you didn't have before. So I don't know how it's going to be. But in the preview right now, again, the Azure Arc server part is free to join servers. And then if you use features like the Log Analytics part or everything which you need the Azure Log Analytics workspace, there you pay for the Log Analytics.
Thanks. And a question about extensions. The extensions that we can deploy to Arc connected machines, are those extensions the same as the extensions that we will use with Azure VMs?
Yes, that's another very good question. So yeah, I have to be careful. Yes, the idea is absolutely that they be the same extensions. However, they are, as far as I saw, they are slightly modified in terms of the naming, that they are called for Azure Arc. However, they should behave in the same manner. The idea of what Azure Arc does in the background, when you look at an Azure VM, you have that guest agent, and that one works against the Azure APIs. Now, the team in the Azure Arc team basically configured the agent in a way that they don't need to rewrite the extensions. So that's like it uses the same APIs and so are available. So the teams for onboarding new extensions or new services, they can just simply work against the same extensions. That said, again, they show up as not as the same extension. They are called Azure Arc. I don't know if that's just a organizational way or if it's if there's a real difference. However, there should not be a big one. Just to be clear, does that help?
Yeah, I was a little bit confused that the naming is now different. So I was talking like, are they the same or a little bit improved in some way? Or there are some rumors that we will have like a single agent for everything at certain point. So just wanted to clarify some of that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That was also happening to me because the idea really, when they showed me the agent, I think they also mentioned that at Microsoft Ignite, that it makes it easy for the teams because it's the same APIs and you can use the same extensions. But then they did that with the name, and I'm not 100% sure. I need to talk to Chen there if that's on purpose, just the name thing, so to manage the different extensions in, like, for example, Resource Manager, or if it's really like because they are also different in a way that there is a real big difference. You can also see that currently we only have 3 extensions. Well, I think in total could be like 6 because we have them for Linux and Windows. But I expect that there will be more available in the future.
Okay. And if, for example, on-premises machine is onboarded to Azure Arc, can I use Azure Automation state configuration to configure that machine?
There I have to be careful how I answer that question, because I don't think it's currently, so if you just use the Arc agent, I don't think that's already in there. There is some limitations there. I need to check that where we are on this, because I did a blog post recently on this, or a draft, and they were kind of like holding me back on that a little bit.
Okay.
But that is something. If you want to drop me an email, I can go out and ask for that, or if you want to drop it to the. I mean, you're also familiar with those people, so.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to help you to figure that out and make sure what the messaging there is.
Yeah, because I mean, before it was possible to configure the on-premises machine through Azure Automation state configuration without even using Arc, right? Yep. But with Arc, that might change, and I was also interested, like how will that change the pricing as well? Because earlier that was quite expensive if you wanted to configure the non-Azure machine.
Yep. Yeah.
Compared to the Azure machine, and Azure machine was free.
Yep.
So, I mean, it will be interesting to see how that will work.
Absolutely, yes. I also hope, like I always hope, that things are not costing too much. But yeah, I had, like, when I was working with it, or try to do some work with it, certain things do not currently work in the way, again, because we're also in preview about this, but I need to figure out what the plan there is. I haven't really had a final answer about this yet.
Okay. Guys, any other questions? Please unmute yourself if you have a question, or just type it to a chat.
I think that there's no more questions.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, we can end the session. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us today. Excellent presentation. So recording will be available on Azure Serbia YouTube channel in a couple of days. And we will talk with Thomas that he might share with us maybe a slide deck, and we will post that on a GitHub repo for Azure Serbia meetup as well. So thank you again, and hopefully next time we will see you in person.